Beautiful.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. My name's Austin Presley. I did my project on logistics solutions for remote locations, the case study of the transmitter repack program. All right. And in this presentation, I use my company. I'm going to be using the name RS instead of using my company name, just so you know. The table of contents, as everyone said, is usually pretty similar to everyone else's. And I'll give you a little introduction, problem, motivation, background. RS is a telecommunications manufacturer that I work for. To start this in 2018, the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, rolled out what was going to be called the REPAC project. It's a 4 to 5 year long project where essentially what they were trying to do is, what they are doing now, is we needed more airspace for 5G coverage. So they're rolling out the 5G cellular data, and the government didn't have enough bandwidth in the air with the ultra high frequency bandwidth. So they needed to figure out a way to find more bandwidth in the air. And their solution for that was to have several radio transmitter and TV transmitter stations upgrade their equipment to more efficient equipment that would use less bandwidth. So what that brings me to is my company makes that TV transmitter equipment as well as 2 or 3 other providers in the country. And we were awarded the contract for over half of the TV transmitters to be replaced across North America. And it was going to be, the FCC would be reimbursing the TV stations for their equipment and construction and warehousing. Ultimately, I'll get to that if necessary. So the problem comes with I must establish the logistics process to get the equipment from the factory all the way to the equipment being installed at the customer as economically and efficiently as possible. So the problem comes with my factory is actually located in Teisenach, Germany, and these transmitter sites are all over the United States. And the interesting about these sites, you can see in my picture in the bottom there, is they're located essentially in the middle of nowhere. They're nowhere near any cities, any sort of any people, any the TV stations. They're put way out there in the field, so they have better signals to transmit. And then this is it's very large freight too. It's not like our companies usually we make a variety of different equipment, but a lot of it's like small packages, little amplifiers for customers that they can use. But these are in fact rather large. Like one, I think our biggest one we make is about 60 crates of material to get to one of these sites out there. Some literature review background. I looked at some other case studies as well for remote logistics projects, and I found one from the American Society of Civil Engineers, which said being able to respond to changes that can and do occur in the field and anticipating scenarios that could occur and how to respond to those scenarios are crucial to running a smooth running program. So essentially they're saying having, they talk about later in the article too, is having a backup plan in case your original plan doesn't work, and you need to be able to adapt to any sort of changes that come with you, because there are going to be quite a few different scenarios with these remote locations. Since we also, one problem I had was we only deliver to these and deal with these locations one time, so it's not like I could get any sort of routine down with these individual transmitter sites. For the data, most commonly damaged items in transit, which I'll speak about later. I ended up having to, and I back into the literature, I Six Sigma class had a lot of things dawn on me about keeping track of data and your processes for bottlenecks. And one of the big bottlenecks I had was with freight arriving damaged, and then it was essentially useless to my customer, and then it would take several weeks to have new equipment built, and I'll go into that more detail in my analysis later. Something I figured out for that. And then also the costs associated with moving all this freight, especially since we had so much of it. We had to figure out the most economical ways. Is it ocean freight? Is it air freight? How are we going to truck these things across the country? Where was the best place to import these locations in the United States related to where the actual transmitter was? So that's another transmitter site down at the bottom. That one looks like it's a little bigger. But this was sort of the first process that I inherited when I came on. We had a freight forwarder in Germany. I know Solomon spoke about freight forwarders earlier. And I've actually worked for a freight forwarder as well myself. So we had this freight forwarder with RS previously, and they did a great job to give you this process. Order would be created, gets manufactured in my plant in Germany. The order is given to the freight forwarder, and then the order would ship to the address on the form. And how that happens, it leaves the airport in Germany, arrives to the local airline. I'm going to be using Dallas as an example, it's DFW. And then in a typical situation, like if a regular customer, it would, a truck would pick up the freight at the airline and then deliver to their warehouse, my customer's warehouse. But in this situation, we picked up the freight that we learned this. We picked up the freight at the airport, and then we was loaded on the truck. It was driven out to the address on the trucker's paperwork, and we realized that there was nobody, in fact, at these sites, and we didn't have anywhere to put the freight. Didn't have anybody to get in contact with. So I had the freight forwarder contact me. I'd have the truck return the freight, sometimes several hours drive back to the airport. They'd have to unload it back into the airport. And once the customer found out what was happening with their freight, they usually were pretty upset that they weren't informed of what was going on. They didn't know the order was coming in this quickly. A lot of lack of communication to start. So the second process, I realized they were angry with the lack of communication. So similar first process, the order was created, manufactured, given to the freight forwarder. But then once the order arrived, I instructed the freight forwarder to call the customer and let them know the order had arrived. So that was my responsibility to make sure all the contacts were made. And a lot of times they weren't able to receive. Like I said, they weren't set up to receive at these locations. So I would have the airline store the equipment for me at a very high cost. And in the occasion that the customer said, yeah, I do actually have men on site, it's not an unmanned site, you guys can go ahead and deliver. The truck would load up again, drive out there, and then we realized that this freight was too large to be offloaded of a tractor trailer. They didn't have any sort of loading docks, warehouse personnel. So then I would be back in the same situation and have to bring the truck back to the airport. And this was all happening simultaneously. It wasn't just one shipment. It was all across the country at the same time. And that's a picture of, it's not my equipment, but that's transmitter equipment. Just for reference, that's like one transmitter station. That's what's in that building at the bottom of the tower that I showed you on one of the first slides. So that's the transmitter, what the equipment is that transmits the signals. The third process we started to enact was we had a customer who had some warehouse space available in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And they said they had personnel there that could receive in the shipment, and then in case our customer wasn't ready, and store it for a fee. And then we could actually push the storage fees back to the customer and they could get the government to repay them for this. So the next, we would ask the customer if they were ready before the order was actually shipped. And then if they weren't, we would ship it directly to our Baton Rouge, Louisiana warehouse. It's not our warehouse, but we were renting the space from someone. And then they could store it there for us until the customer was ready. And the only problem with that was Baton Rouge was a good location there, but if the customers were in like Portland or Canada or California, obviously it would take several days to sometimes weeks to ship the orders from Baton Rouge to the customer's location. Let's see. So, and then another benefit with that was we were able to use ocean freight as opposed to air freight, since it was going into a port in Baton Rouge. Typical air freight cost for one of our shipments was around $50,000 to $60,000 an order, and an ocean freight container for us was only about $4,000 to $6,000 an order. So originally we were shipping with air freight because we thought the customer was going to need this equipment really quickly. But then it turns out that actually there's a lot more logistics that required. So we were able to use ocean freight to ship directly into Baton Rouge. With the previous processes, unloading and loading all that freight as well too, we ran across a lot of damaged equipment. And like I said, that would delay us for weeks at a time. So once I started keeping track of the most damaged items, we started keeping safety stock of those damaged items as well. About 75% of each order would be able to be replaced with our safety stock. And there's only about 25% that was manufactured for site specific. So I couldn't replace those items if they were damaged, but that still decreased our wait time for actually having to wait to be remanufactured. I was able to replace about 75% of the items if they did get damaged. So this process worked great for us. The Baton Rouge warehouse, the government was repaying us back with any storage, but then the pandemic hit the global supply chain, as I know has been talked about before. My factory in Germany would no longer pay. They couldn't pay for a freight forwarder anymore. Their rates had gone up about 10 times what they were. So they decided to switch everything to FedEx Freight. FedEx Freight is good. In fact, they can move usually relatively quickly. But the only problem, we ran into the same problem again, where they would ship directly to the customer, and the FedEx trucks would just show up at the customer site with no knowledge. And to add another hiccup in this, the Baton Rouge warehouse was no longer available around 2021 as well too. So I'm running into the same problems as I had for the past couple months. This is all taking over a couple months. And then I had to try to figure out a way for, because FedEx would not hold this freight for me as well. I had a couple situations where they would ship the freight actually back to Germany when I wasn't able to figure out what to do with it. So then what I decided to do, since I no longer was able to use a freight forwarder, and I decided to reach out to one of my truckers that I used and then had them figure out a local warehouse to the transmitter site. Like, for example, where I was shipping it to Baton Rouge warehouse and they would truck it to Portland, I had my trucker find a warehouse that they could use in Portland. And then I would have FedEx ship the freight directly to the warehouse in Portland and then truck locally to the site from there. So this was great because I started reaching out to the customer about, we put a process in place with my factory. About 3 weeks beforehand, I'd reach out to the customer and give them a heads up that this is about to be finished manufacturing. And I'd tell them my plan that I'm sending this to a warehouse near them. They're usually pretty excited about that. And then they could get a crew on site within 3 weeks time. And they were usually ready for me once I had everything received into that local warehouse, and I could schedule a delivery with the customer and their installation team for a much quicker transit than Baton Rouge to the customer site. So for some of the results and recommendations, this was great for some of the results. It was great for a shortened wait time for a lot of the damaged parts. I was happy that it came out of this. Like I said, sometimes I would have a crew on site and I would only be missing a handful of parts, and I had to wait several weeks to get them from my factory. Whereas now I keep them on site and I can get that to the site pretty quickly. Additionally, the shortened transit time for the domestic leg of the shipment, not the international portion coming across the Atlantic, but for the domestic leg where I was taking several days to ship from the warehouse to the site. Now it's only at the most a couple hours. So if I ever have customers that are not as prepared as others, and they tell me almost day of that they're ready to install the equipment, I can have the equipment there pretty quickly. And my sales team and customers have loved the responsiveness now that we're able to have for their installations. And additionally, not so much now, I don't use the ocean freight anymore, but we did, like I said, we could save about $50,000 per shipment by being able to ship to that Baton Rouge warehouse. So in conclusion, the further upstream you can plan for possible scenarios, the better, but you still need to be able to adapt to new challenges as well. I wish I was, and this project's still going on, and I'm still running into challenges every day. But currently I have this new process in place for finding the local warehouse, but currently I have a site in Nebraska where I couldn't find anybody locally. So I still have to use probably a further away warehouse. So it's not perfect, but as long as I'm communicating with the customer and letting them know about these changes, they're usually pretty open to any changes that I need to have. So just in conclusion, just wanted to thank Dr. Lee and the entire Towson University supply chain program. Really enjoyed my time doing this, and just happy for everything I've learned and what it's helped me out in my current situation. So thanks. I'll open up to any questions.